What's up guys, Lon here from Android Authority, and LG's latest addition to its G series lineup is playing it much safer this year, but it's also pushing a few boundaries on what the future of smartphones should be at the same time. Knowing what's on the smartphone horizon for 2017, LG is going to be facing some stiff competition, so let's go ahead and find out if the G6 has what it takes to gain LG some much needed traction in this first look. So this is the LG G6, and no, it's not modular anymore, but after the G5 more or less became a failed modular experiment, I don't think this was all too surprising of a move. Instead, LG's taking a more conservative approach with the G6 and following the current smartphone trend, which is, if you haven't guessed it, is metal and glass. Pretty much every flagship smartphone is made of metal, glass, or a combination of the two, and with the G6 you have a metal frame with chamfered edges sandwiched between two pieces of Gorilla Glass. It's a combination that we've seen many times by now, and while it's not the most inspiring design, it still has some of LG's more iconic design features like the rear mounted power key, and yes, for those of you who are wondering, the G6 does come with a headphone jack. There's a couple of things that change with this new design, and these changes are huge. First off, because of this sealed-in design, you're no longer getting a removable battery, but at 3300 milliamp hours, you are getting one of the largest batteries LG has ever put in one of their phones. Secondly, although you're losing the removable battery, this new design has allowed LG to make the G6 IP68 dust and water resistant, and with how valuable this feature is starting to become to even the most average of consumers, I think it's a trade-off that is completely worth it. Where LG is really pushing boundaries is on the front. The bezels on this phone are crazy thin, not only on the sides, but also along the top and bottom. It's got a 5.7-inch screen, but when you hold it, you'll have a very hard time believing that this is a 5.7-inch smartphone. It's surprisingly easy to use in one hand. A lot of that also has to do with the screen's new aspect ratio. It's a Quad HD screen with 18:9 or 2:1 aspect ratio if you simplify it, which makes the screen taller and narrower, allowing you to more easily wrap your hands around it. This new aspect ratio also means that if you split the screen in half widthwise, you'll get two perfectly symmetrical squares, and LG has tweaked their new interface to take advantage of this. You'll notice that many of LG's stock apps have been updated to follow the natural guidelines or proportions created by the 2:1 aspect ratio, and even elements like the new lock screen and wallpapers were designed with this aspect ratio in mind. The screen has built-in HDR support for brighter, sharper, and more brilliant colors, and both Dolby Vision and HDR10 are supported here, so you'll be able to enjoy movies and TV shows from streaming services that offer HDR content like Netflix or Amazon Prime Video. You might have noticed the corners of the display are also rounded to sort of match the rounded corners of the phone itself, and while the rounded corners are a nice aesthetic touch, it actually does serve a practical purpose. Usually when you drop a phone, the majority of the time it tends to land on a corner, and having the corners of the display rounded off allows the stress of the impact to be better dispersed, which helps improve the phone's overall durability and reduces the odds of getting a shattered screen. The G6 does have wireless charging and a Hi-Fi DAC, but unfortunately these features are region specific. The US model is going to be the only version that gets wireless charging, while the Hi-Fi DAC will be limited to select Asian markets. And LG's reasoning for this is that they tend to include features based on consumers' wants and needs in each particular region. So for example, the US has a very high demand for wireless charging, hence why the US version gets wireless charging, but the other regions, including Korea, do not. There's a dual camera system on the back with one standard and one wide-angle lens, but unlike the G5 or V20 where there were two different resolutions, LG has made both cameras the same resolution for the G6. So ultimately what you have here is two 13-megapixel cameras, which means you won't be losing any resolution when switching between cameras, and LG has also improved the transition between the two cameras and made it noticeably smoother. 13 megapixels is a step down from the 16 megapixels that LG was using previously, but LG said the reasoning behind the reduction in megapixels was in favor of getting rid of the camera bump, but this sacrifice in resolution didn't result in bigger pixels, and the aperture still remains the same from previous LG phones at f1.8. So although we don't know just yet how it's going to perform in low light, it is a concern at the moment. The camera app itself did get a little bit of a refresh. Again, this is another one of LG's apps that got updated for the 2:1 aspect ratio, and LG has leveraged the extra horizontal space by allowing you to see multiple previews of photos that you've taken instead of just the one photo that most smartphone cameras typically let you see. One of the biggest changes to the camera is that LG has brought manual video recording to the G6, which means you no longer have to wait for the V series if you want manual video controls. Inside, it's got your typical flagship specs with the Snapdragon 821, 4GB of RAM, and 32 gigs of internal storage. There is a 64GB version as well, but this is another feature that's going to only be available in certain Asian markets, but all models do have the micro SD card slot with support for up to 2TB if you need the extra storage. Some people might be disappointed that it's not running the newer Snapdragon 835, but LG made it pretty clear to us that they're not trying to win the spec race anymore, and instead are focusing on trying to deliver a smooth and optimized user experience, which they feel is more important to consumers. It'll be launching with Android Nougat, and just like LG does every year, they've updated the GUI for the G6. It's got a refreshing new look with natural and vivid colors that you can see throughout many of the apps and new set of included wallpapers. LG has also updated the icons to make them all the same size and more uniform. You'll notice that they are all now rounded squares to complement the rounded corners of the display, and other elements like the background of a folder and pop-up menus all have rounded corners to match. The G6 also comes with Google Assistant on board, which is really good news, so you no longer have to buy a Pixel if you want a phone with Google Assistant, and this also makes the G6 the first non-Google phone to be running Google Assistant. This has been a quick hands-on look of the LG G6. For more on the G6, check us out at AndroidAuthority.com and keep it tuned here to the Android Authority YouTube channel for more MWC 2017 coverage.